many of you follow my brother on Instagram. He really is. Many people call him the professor now. He's so much more interesting. So you should be listening to him. But he's going to start by taking you through a couple of slides of our father's work so that you get this, we set the scene. And then we'll talk about how he's influenced both of us in our own worlds of design.
Very good. Well, hello. I don't think I'm known as the professor, but anyway, you certainly were known as Decibel when we were younger. Anyway, I've got 3 spreads from our father's scrapbooks, which I've just published an edition of, and we have those if you would like afterwards, which we can both sign if anybody's curious. But here's the spread featuring the arrival in the world of the great India. You can see top right a family group taken by Lord Lichfield, who was a cousin of the Queen and quite a talented photographer, and in the corner of our father's drawing room at Britwell, which is the house in colour below it, and so that's where we grew up. And there's India in the christening robe that was inherited from our grandfather, I think, and we were all put in that christening robe, me included, obviously, which is, you know, as you can see, I haven't strayed far from the feminine fashion, you know, heritage. And there's our other sister, Edwina, on the left, who's putting a restraining arm over her baby sister, which was a theme that was to continue for a little while. And then on the left-hand page, you can see Mark Hampton's first New York apartment, Mark and Dwayne Hampton's apartment, designed by my father for them as a wedding present when Mark was his New York associate. And then going on, here's a spread from about 75, something like that, and so more rooms in our house in the country. And so this is where we grew up, this very sort of relaxed, very conventional, very neutrally decorated environment. You know, clashing pinks, and this room this was an extra living room because the other drawing room was, you know, had already been decorated, and so he decided to take over. You can see the picture of the house on the bottom. That there's a wing on the right, and so that had been a squash court in the 1930s. But you know, my father obviously did not play squash, but he did like to entertain, and so had this very modern living room constructed, and the ceiling was made of polystyrene acoustic tiles, so that late at night he could drink lots of gin and tonic and listen to Wagner at full volume without waking the sleeping guests on the floor above. And then on the swing, of course, our little India on the right, and Edwina again, and I'm probably off at boarding school, having been dispatched. And then here are the postcards that he had printed so that, you know, he could send little thank you cards and things to his friends with photographs of the house. And then on the left are luggage labels, which he devised for us in, whenever this, I can't see the date, 73, 74. And those you can see have, you know, masculine and feminine coloring, do you see? And so the masculine one is orange with a sort of turquoise band, and the girls get the reverse. And then his just says, Mr. David Hicks, and he's got his H logo, and the rest of us have the H logo and then a geometric monogram of our letters, which India has appropriated since. And I don't know if there's a picture of that, but we'll see. Anyway, now over to you.
No, and that's so obvious, and of course I haven't done that. I think what is fascinating is that we are clearly siblings with the same father, and yet we have such incredibly different views on design. Ashley's, I think you'll see at the end, is rather like his suit. Much more outspoken, much more direct. Mine is a little bit more timid. I left England, ran away, spent quite a few years in your great country, and then went to the Bahamas, where I met and fell in love with someone who has stuck by me, thank God. We have 5 kids, and we moved into Hibiscus Hill. I'm pointing there because I've got a screen. It's so weird. I'm not pointing to you guys down here. It's sort of, and Hibiscus Hill became our home. And there we go. Let me see if I can work that. There we go. And this is the dining room at Hibiscus Hill, and we had inherited that rather alarming chandelier. And we bought all of our furniture in New Orleans, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong. I know it's New Orleans, isn't it? Something like that. Thank you.
No.
Thank you. And we had a wonderful time there, and we went to Magazine Street and went through all the antique stores, and we did a big mistake, which is to buy all of our furniture at once. Never do that. And when it arrived by ship to Harbour Island, where I lived, we unloaded these crates upon crates, and we thought, what were we thinking? And now we're stuck with rather a lot of alarming furniture. That dining room table there is enjoyed by my family, but more so by the termites, unfortunately. But on the wall behind, we had the brilliant idea of these little shelves where we would put family pictures. And people who came to stay, we would put them out to the front, and when they began to annoy us, we put them to the back, obviously. When my father came, the one and only time that he came to my home in the Bahamas, he flew in for a day. It was very close to his death, and in fact, I think Ashley was the one who suggested that he and I needed to spend a bit of time together. We had an unlikely relationship, and he at times could be a very tricky father, and there were moments where we weren't very close, and Ashley said, you know, his life is definitely coming to an end. So my father made the enormous effort to come and see me in the Bahamas. And he toured the house, and even though he was clearly very ill, he was still on fine form. And he said that really there was nothing as common as putting photographs on a wall. This is the inside of our home, and we went to great lengths to take it back from looking like it was 1950s to taking it back well over that. We ripped up the white tiles, and we put down these thick, extra-length fur floorboards. The housekeeper left at that point, too. She and my father both thought that I clearly had no taste at all. But again, very much inspired by my father, who had an extraordinary library of red leather books. Vellum? Red vellum? Is that the real word?
No, just red leather.
Red leather. No. Oh, I thought Mum always said
vellum
vellum.
are the white ones in his bedroom.
Oh, my God, you see how uneducated I am. Ashley's very well read. I call them red vellum, clearly a complete misdemeanor. But we wanted to have a collection of books. We couldn't afford red leather, so we took brown paper, and the majority behind that sailboat were covered in brown paper, but very much inspired by my father to have this library all of one color. My other half is also called David, which can get confusing and sometimes a little Freudian, because I start to refer to sleeping with David. So remind yourselves that I sleep with David, my other half, and my father was David. But that's our lending library of hats. Again, very much here inspired by my father, who always said collections were hugely important. Once you took something and added more of it, a collection was so much more valuable than one thing on its own. So we thought, oh, perfect with the hats there. We often find our gardener coming in the morning and just deciding which hat he'll borrow for the day. Which hat will he mow the lawn in today? This very much inspired by my dad. I couldn't do color in the way that he did color, feeling that there was such a kaleidoscope of color in the Bahamas already. We made the interiors of our homes much more muted and pale grays, creams, beiges. But then, of course, I had to get in some color there. So this is a bright hibiscus pink on our staircase. In fact, we've had many designers come through the house who said, brilliant color, what is it? Nobody actually now knows, because the local hardware store ran out of one base, mixed it with another, and now God knows what that color is. We grew up on a neighboring island to where I live, on Eleuthera, and my father designed a very extraordinary house there, based on an Egyptian mausoleum, the Temple of King Zoser. Mm-hmm. And everybody else lived in very normal, regular Caribbean homes, and we lived in an Egyptian mausoleum, which is actually fatal in the tropics, because, of course, he designed it with a flat roof, and anybody who knows anything about tropical climates, I'm sure here in North Carolina you suffer from that too. You don't want a flat roof because of the rain, and of course the rain just sits on this roof. Anyway, it was a very remarkable house, but it was very, very modern in its look. But my father would then tour the neighboring settlements around, and he would find old plantation homes, and he would borrow balustrades from the outsides of these homes and from the terraces of these homes, and he would bring them back and pin them to the walls or nail them to the walls of this very clean modern house. And again, amazing David Hicks juxtaposition. I'm never so bold as to do the complete modern with the old. But this is our guest house, and again, we decided that it needed a facelift, and we had removed our balustrades, and very much my father's way, we put those X-form spindles up there, so that house got a very quick facelift a la David Hicks. This couldn't be further from David Hicks, rather suspicious toile, which was a collection I did when I was working for HSN, and the beds that we had made in the Bahamas by local carpenters, we call those anyway, there are 4-poster beds. But we decided living in the Bahamas that everybody who comes to stay really wants a very good mattress. You want to sleep incredibly well. They spend the day at the beach, but you want to sleep incredibly well. But my father very generously, just before he died, said, would I like some oil paintings? And I thought, yes, of course, you know, I would take anything. So he very generously shipped these out to me. And when they arrived, they literally were just the oil paintings. He'd kept the gilt frames, which were much more valuable than the oil painting. So then we had to get our rather drunk carpenter to make this brown wooden frame, and you can see it's rather higgledy-piggledy. The more he's had a Kalik, which is our local beer, on a Friday night, the frame got more and more crazy. My David always says these are our fat aunts. I don't actually think they're any relation, are they?
No, they are. They're sort of.
They are our fat aunts.
Well, very, very distant, very distant. But they were banished from Albany. When he redid his apartment in London 3 years before he died, he banished the female portrait, saying Albany isn't a place for women. So that's why you've got those.
Yeah. Well, actually, talking about that, Albany is this amazing, the oldest private residence in London.
Well, oldest apartment building.
Oldest apartment building. My God, I'm going to get a history lesson in a minute. And they really do not encourage children or dogs. Ashley now has inherited the set. It's called a set. From our parents, but when my parents were living there, they obviously had a country house, and then they had the London set, and we had to be smuggled in. And I wasn't even given a bed. I was made to sleep in the top of a cupboard. I kid you not. It was the top of a cupboard. There was a little ladder on a door to hide me even more. I mean, it's amazing that we haven't had more therapy. On Eleuthera, a neighboring island to Harbour Island, David and I were exploring many, many years ago, and we came across a rather amazing building that had been looked like a cricket pavilion. We went inside, and it was completely empty and dilapidated, but filled with bats, horrible, horrible bats. But we were very inspired by this, and we thought, let's build our own cricket pavilion, and this will really be our chance to be minimal, to take all the layers out, and just to be very, very clean. So we built the cricket pavilion, and then we thought, you know what, why don't we add just a bird cage, and then a round table and the globe, and then maybe some coffee table books. Oh, and those 2 fake David Hicks chairs that we found somewhere. And of course, inevitably, we couldn't stop, and the layering came in. And again, I think that our father, even when he was being minimal, there were always layers to it. Look at those chairs. Well, I think they're West Elm. You've probably never even seen them.
No, I think, yeah.
And then we built some bookshelves at the end of this pavilion, and we thought, let's keep those very, very clean. And of course, not at all. The collections begin to creep in. But money, of course, was clearly running out by the time we built this. So there's actually empty boxes, empty Hermes boxes. They're not even Hermes that I owned. They're other people's empty Hermes boxes. But again, with the idea that something, a collection begins to become more interesting. And here you'll see, very much taken from my father, the idea of keeping something, of keeping the scrap. And Ashley's, the books that he's put together, my father's scrapbooks, illustrate this hugely. My father was one really for keeping everything. And so I put all the envelopes together here and made a frame out of them, which are quite fun. Obviously, the ones that say the Lord Chamberlain with the crest and the royal, you want to open those envelopes, definitely. Again, my father was all about colour, colour, colour. And so I do splashes of colour, little spurts of colour, not nearly in the dynamic and forceful and inventive way that he does. But this is a very good example of my tentative use of colour. It's also an example of reimagination. My father was brilliant at taking things and repurposing them. I remember growing up, he was always taking little buds from the garden. He loved his garden, and he would take little tiny rose rose heads, and he would put them in cartridges. What were they called? Film cartridges. Those little
empty plastic film
plastic
cartridges. Yeah.
And they became the vase for the flower. I mean, brilliant. And he would repaper lampshades with Italian marbleized wrapping paper. And even more brilliantly, he took his mother or grandmother's evening dress, her velvet evening dress, and he upholstered the breast of his chimney piece in his mother's evening dress. It was wonderful. So we had this sofa in our home for many years, and my mother used to come for a month every Christmas and would sit in the same corner, so the sofa would go slightly like this. And after a while, we thought really time to upgrade the sofa because I'd inherited it with the house. And unfortunately, by the time we were doing this, I had started and founded a business, and I had less time. And I only got round to ordering things on the internet late at night when the office had closed. And I'm not good with numbers. Luckily, I don't run the numbers on the business. You'll be relieved to know. You'll be particularly relieved to know. One of my bosses is sitting in here. You'll be very relieved to know I'm not doing any of the numbers on the business. And I saw a very good-looking sofa, and I thought, perfect. And I popped it in a shopping basket, pushed by. And of course, getting anything to the Bahamas is agony, as you can imagine, being shipped, and the tax and the shipping duties and all the rest. It's no easy project. And when it arrived, our top banana, who manages our home and manages my kids, rang me in the office, and she was down on the dock getting the sofa out of customs, and she said, that sofa that used to sit 4, possibly 5, did you mean to order a 2-seater one? And of course, I pushed the wrong button on the thing. And a 2-seater sofa turned up. It's very hard to sell a brand new 2-seater sofa on a small tropical island, I can tell you. My David was very, very cross about it. I wasn't allowed to do any shopping for a while. What we had to do is then go back to the main sofa with the in like that, and we just had to have that reupholstered. And so I should have just done that in the first place. I should have just simply reupholstered the sofa and given it that new look in the same way that my father would reupholster a lampshade and reupholster a chimney breast. But I think much of the life that we lived in England definitely came with me and stayed with me. And even though I've lived out of England for many, many, many years, that the idea of English gardens and English nests has absolutely stayed with me. Our father created a very lovely garden, which Ashley lives in, and he had a secret walled garden and had planted an extravagant amount of roses in it. And it was somewhere that my sister and I were to get engaged. Well, my sister didn't get engaged in the walled garden, and I never got married. Someone's leaving. Is it this boring? He's gone. Are you coming back? Okay. It's too worrying. There we go. He's got a camera. That's all right. He never came to stay and listen anyway. If anyone else gets up, you're in big trouble. Anyway, in the walled garden where my father imagined this great romantic moment to happen, it never happened. I never got engaged. I never got bloody married, and my sister certainly didn't get engaged in this walled garden. So when I was able and lucky enough to be able to create a fragrance, I wanted to go back to that walled garden. And it's all about warm English rain, rose and peony petals, mown grass, and it really takes me back to that walled garden. But again, it's interesting when it came to me to be able to actually create a lifestyle brand and to be able to really bring the stories of my childhood alive, that I wanted to do it in a fragrance that first time. But very much mixed with my own Runaway Island story. You can see that there's a beetle there. He's our good luck beetle. I always say he's an uninvited but much loved guest, and he comes into our home in the Bahamas. And so I've got very much the British heritage and the island story in the line and the collection that I've developed. My father, although tricky at times, he was very family-minded, although he decided he was never going to spend Christmas with us after a while and went to spend Christmas somewhere else because he really couldn't, he detested Christmas. But there was a big sense of family. My brother lives in the stable block next door to my mother. My mother goes over and watches a film with Ashley nearly every night. I'm very close to Ashley's children. Ashley's about to have another child. I get another nephew, which is exciting. And much of my business, I feel, is a family affair as well. I've been very blessed and lucky to work with extraordinary women across America, and I've had the great opportunity of traveling your amazing country and seeing parts of it that I never imagined. But wanting to keep the family alive within the business as well, my sister, our beautiful sister Edwina, I asked her to draw something for us, and so this is her Crown Imperial plant, and we made these into scarves. And, oh my God, Ashley, I'm stealing your slides.
Mm-hmm.
I've completely jumped. They've cut off my slides.
All right.
They wouldn't even let me have my last slide.
That was the last.
Was that it?
Yeah.
That was it. Oh my
I think so.
goodness. There we go. It was very funny because when we were starting this, Ashley said, "You get 10 slides, I get 10 slides." But then he had 3 at the beginning. And he said, "No, but those are our fathers." I said, "No, but you put them in. There were 3 there." And I think he's taken another one out. I don't think I ended on this one at all. Anyway, I'm very blessed and lucky to be very close to my siblings and feel that there is a very strong family bond. And again, as I said, it's remarkable that our father gave birth to 3 completely different children. We couldn't be more different. Decibel and someone who's much more quiet. But as I said, my decorating is probably a lot calmer, and Ashley's is much more interesting. So it's been great fun to be able to do this together and to be able to sit here and talk to a few here.
Is this working? Oh.
I think it
Is it?
Yes.
Is this working? Yeah. You can hear me? Good. Well, now, I mean, yeah. A few pictures of rooms I've decorated, and so I've sort of picked ones that are, reflect the influence or lack of our father. And so this is, I mean, and I have to say, most of the ones that do show any influence from him, he would undoubtedly say were absolutely ghastly. Including this. So we've got, a line of bookcases this is a French actress's sort of study home office in London and South Ken. And so despite having sort of David Hicks' shocking pink lacquered walls and a very David Hicksy sort of carpet with a geometric flower design that I designed, but very much, influenced by his, which in turn were taken from ancient Egyptian motifs, these ones. Then there's this wall of oak cupboards which have inset panels of purple ostrich leather, and of course it's actually, no, I think it is leather, but it's stamped to look like ostrich. And anyway, it's something that he would have thought was so ghastly, absolutely impossibly awful. And plus, I'm so mad that I do quite a lot of stuff myself. And so I actually worked out that it was going to cost me a fortune to get a joiner or an upholsterer or someone to cut out these bits of leather and stick them on the wooden doors. And so I stuck them on all of them on myself. And going on, this is the living room for the same woman. And here, again, giant sectional sofa, is the absolute bane of good designers, And while actually they are quite practical, they do work quite well. It's not something my father would ever have approved of. He was all about, you had to have separate little conversational groups. And it was all of, aesthetics were absolutely paramount. It's the idea of having an enormous piece of seating like that, a disaster in his eyes. But I've tried to sort of break it up, the design, and do it in a very neutral color so it sort of disappears. And then again, mistakes in this room, so that the walls have this rather bold sort of random geometric abstract design painted on them. Which, it's random, it doesn't have a symmetry to it. So that would be anathema to him again. And then plus, I've again been sufficiently nutty to paint it myself, as if I'm sort of Sol LeWitt doing a wall drawing or something, very pretentious. And then also I've told the clients that they should, because the great challenge with family homes is that people have a beautiful living room, they never sit in it, because they want to sit in the kitchen or in the TV room, and hang out with the kids. And so the formal sort of living room just gets unused, except for the, once a year, a big dinner party. And so I said to the clients, let's make it in double as a cinema. And so up on the top of the wall, you can see there's a sort of a weird bronze sort of geometric eye thing, and that has a movie projector in it. And here's a guest room in my house in the country, which is a complete tribute to our father. And so there he is, dominating the room, and a portrait of him done in 1969, where obviously he's smoking away, and sitting underneath an Ellsworth Kelly painting that he bought very candidly and then sold, he thought very smartly, about 5 years later for $5,000 or pounds or something. Today it would be about $5 million. So it was possibly a bit too early to sell. But the walls are in this what he called Coca-Cola lacquer, which is a rather wonderful color. that he actually borrowed from Billy Baldwin. He then claimed for the rest of his life that he'd invented it, but in fact it was really Billy's. And then this is my bedroom in a rented flat in London about 5 years ago or something. So because it was rented, I didn't want to paint the walls. And so to give it a bit of character, I made these big screens with David Hicks, big-scaled hexagon wallpaper, and so which is from Cole & Son, that is. And then the entire thing, and the wardrobe chest of drawers on the left, do you see, is a sort of cheap chest of drawers from a catalog or online or something, and then it comes with aluminium handles, very simple, minimal aluminium handles, and looks completely hideous. So I took the aluminium handles off and molded onto them some polymer clay to make them look like giant pieces of coral, which gives it a bit of character and interest, I think. And this is my dining room in the country, and again, my God, imagine, tiled floor, and I must say my ex-wife was also tiled floor with her Italian accent, yes, and then also was livid that I painted trees all over the walls and designed the dining table, and actually when we went to a marriage counselor and she announced she wanted a divorce, this was one of the reasons she gave, was that I had insufficiently consulted her over the decoration of our new dining room in the country. And what was she going to do with that tiled floor? It's actually fantastic, the tiled floor, because you can, anyone can make a mess and you just clean it up. And it's got our father's H logo design on it. But then, of course, I messed the whole thing up with these naive hand-painted trees on the walls, which he would have thought was absolutely the limit, ghastly. And then I make my own door furniture, and so the handles, you see, I've made in clay and had them cast in bronze, and then I've hammered in each of those upholstery nails around them, making these sort of spheres. I'll try and rush through a bit so we can get back to listening to India.
Absolutely not.
Decibel.
No,
Decibel.
It's very
What?
exciting. There's a man there. He's either reading a book as he's bored, or he's taking notes. He's taking notes.
Hey, don't be absurd. Stop picking on the audience members. You're terrible. Should you be a stand-up comic? Should be horrible, wouldn't you? And where have you come from? Anyway, so this is the living room in a house in the country, and so this room actually, I did the walls of this room while our father was still alive, and they're painted to look as if it's squares of green stained leather stretched on the walls and sewn together with big leather stitching, which was inspired by a room in a German castle a cousin of our mother's had, where they had leather from deer that were killed by American bombs in the war in Germany. Anyway, but this sort of...
Too much detail.
That is a bit too much detail. But the green paint, whatever, was the sort of thing my father absolutely loathed. Specialist paint effects or, fake anything or, trompe-l'oeil effects. And so he was very, very annoyed. I several times caught him before he died sitting in this room looking at the walls, glaring at them with this sort of angry look on his face. And then he'd see me come in and he'd say, they really are rather good. Absolutely furious that he'd found that he liked something that he knew he should despise, and especially that his son had done. And so then in here there's bits of my furniture, like the X-frame ottoman and that funny little table that doesn't know where it's going. And the sofa has some trim on it, borders, which are actually saved from some David Hicks curtains from 1969 that were chucked out by somebody and passed on to me by the decorator who had to decorate the house afterwards. And so I reused those. And then the mirror I made myself, or the fireplace, everything. I like doing things with my hands, which is most unfortunate. And then this is our poor father's beautiful apartment in Albany, in London, the set in this wonderful building. It was built in 1803. And this was made very famous by him. And I did a book on him, published by Rizzoli, where he's sitting in a sort of gold throne with swan arms in front of a red state bed and red painted walls. And that is this doorway. He's sitting there. And so now I've gone and completely mucked up the whole thing. It started because our mother was no longer able to do the stairs going up to the apartment. And so she decided not to stay there anymore. So I then took it over. And when I went in, of course, it was completely empty because she'd given all the furniture to poor India, who didn't have any. Poor India, no furniture. So she got all the beautiful furniture from here, which actually, of course, thrilled me, because although I love the furniture, I like to make things myself. And so, being saddled with a lot of, wonderful things that you've been given or inherited actually limits your creativity slightly.
Of course, poor in.
Poor in.
I should turn the microphone off for this bit. Poor India. Poor India was given the furniture, but actually was given the bloody building, right?
Touche. No, I think they heard. I think they heard. So anyway, in here, what are the mistakes in here? There's looking through. There's a living room and a bedroom. It's basically two big rooms, and then you've got a couple of little rooms as well. And they were built as sort of bachelor apartments, so that a rather posh, rich young man could live there without the expense of a whole house and all the servants you needed for that. You could live here with just one or maybe two servants. It's quite a reasonable place to make. And it actually works brilliantly now. You don't need any servants at all. You need someone to clean it once a week or something. And you can literally just lock the door and leave. It's like a hotel room. But I, as you can see, just completely mucked the place up and painted this sort of like a scenic wallpaper, like an 18th century scenic wallpaper, onto Hessian, which I stuck onto the walls. So it's sort of burlap, I think you call it. And then painted on there this panorama of Constantinople, like the modern Istanbul, in 1820. It was originally painted by a Frenchman, and so I copied that onto there. And I had a collection of rather eccentric chickens in Oxfordshire, and so I painted them in this sort of shell niche over the door, and then put mirror in the big arched alcove through in the next room, which then gives a very convincing impression of being a whole enfilade of rooms. And so it looks as if I've got 4 rooms instead of the usual 2. And other people who live in the similar, matching, in fact, apartments in the same building, if they come over for a drink or something, they catch sight of this mirror and they're suddenly furious. And they're like, "Oh, you went through?" And then they see themselves in the mirror and they're so relieved. Here's my eccentric new wife adjusting her hair in the mirror, and you can see that mirror, so that's another thing I designed and made myself, and shaped these bits of wood and lacquered them in these rather Caribbean sea colors. And the result is something that I rather love and find quite fun, and our father would have absolutely, he'd be turning in his grave to thought this monstrosity was up on the wall in Albany. And then on the right is a sculpture. I make these funny totem sculptures. So I do these little ones that sit on tables and things, which you can buy on my website, and then big ones for clients, and this one for myself, which are these pieces that are cast in brightly colored resin. And then I designed everything in the picture. And on the left is the bed, and next to the bed I painted this enormous eye staring in through a sort of peephole in the masonry wall, as if you're meant to sort of feel like you're trapped in a doll's house, or you're in Gulliver's Travels, where he's trapped in a little doll palace, and the evil sort of princess is looking in through the window at him.
I mean, the poor new wife.
Well, the idea.
Can you imagine she sleeps with that thing?
I mean, it wasn't really the idea, but sort of the idea was that it wouldn't be too friendly an environment. If somebody did. I was a single man, so I thought, I didn't really want a life complicated by a new lady. So if somebody did come and, possibly stay the night, they might be discouraged from coming back by the presence of that eye. And unfortunately, my crazy Texan wife wasn't discouraged at all. Took it quite in her stride. And then on the right is the tiny, tiny bathroom, which is a very narrow little bathroom. And it was much smaller because it had its ceiling lowered until it was practically touching your head, because it had India Hicks's little sleeping cubbyhole above, you see, from when she was 13. She had to crawl up into this cubbyhole, which she now complains about. She thought it was fun at the time, I remember. Or her father thought it would be fun for her.
I'm much more concerned that I've now worked out, of course, he's added in another slide, because these are 2 slides in one, isn't it? You see? It's unbelievable.
Well, this is the end, Anyway, and so that bathroom, then the walls, do you see, are covered in glass, which is reverse printed with a sort of trompe-l'oeil cabinet, ideal museum cabinet with my own photographs of masterpieces in the Louvre and the Met and places like that. And then there's a whole wall of mirror, obviously, on the left, and that sort of angled soffit to the doorway through to that area, which makes this sort of pointed arch and makes it feel quite convincingly like a bigger thing. Anyway, there we are. That's enough from me. That's it.
So
Now
I think really the whole idea that it would be a conversation, because we can't bear the idea of standing here lecturing.
Can we give a round of applause and thank you for your time here today? We greatly appreciated it.